Hello and welcome to Upstage Downstage.
With me, Richard Platt, seated in the upper circle.
And me, Stephen Rees, seated in a cheap seat. This is the Theatre Podcast, where we discuss the productions we've seen, things we've liked and may not have liked, giving our complete unprofessional and non-biased opinions.
So grab a brew, take a seat and let's raise that curtain.
For today's episode, we'll be taking a look at Sheila's Island by Tim Firth, which is a gender-swapped version of his all-male cast play Neville's Island, which you may be familiar with, which had its first run in 1992 at Stephen Joseph Theatre in Scarborough. We saw this production at Derby Theatre on the 25th of March 2022. So Richard, what's it all about?
It's Bonfire Night in 2019. Sheila, Denise, Julie and Faye are Team C in the Pennine Mineral Water Limited's annual Outward Bound team building weekend. Somehow, Sheila has been nominated team leader and using her cryptic crossword solving skills has unwittingly stranded her team on an island in the Lake District.
So, with all that said, let's set the scene! So Richard, what's your first impressions of the set and the layout of this particular production that we saw?
Personally, I think I was a little bit disappointed.
Yeah,
just purely because it just felt a little bit amateurish. I felt like the set builders have been given quite a low budget. I've seen better from some amateur performances, to be fair. Yes,
it kind of gave that impression, even though the rocks that they actually, I don't know how they made that, it looked quite
the rockery
sturdy.
was laid out and yeah, it was usable.
Because I've seen like the Neville's Island where it's just had like brown fabric draped over, I suppose, blocks or something, you know, just to make it whatever. But I suppose it's more atmospheric, the way it was laid out, you know, with the trees in the background, the great big tree as well, where Faye climbs up the majority of the time. But it was a bit bare. And sometimes I think it was in between of they either do it with no set or they do it with a lot of set. And this just seemed to sort of slide between
It's like
both.
Sometimes less is more, but
Yeah.
this was more I think we needed more. The staging could have worked a lot better if it was improved a little bit, I feel.
And bless those actors, because they were walking on, I suppose, with all that water about as well, on slippery surfaces, because you could see them sort of trying to navigate.
There was moments where it sort of hindered their performance, I feel.
Yes, they were gingerly
They got in the
walking, trying not to slip. Whether that was part of the performance or not, I don't know, but I'd imagine that kind of hard plastic, kind of whatever material they used for the rocks, because it wasn't rocks. We heard the echo. You knew that with water about they could particularly slip. So, yeah, first impressions for me, the moment I saw it, I thought, oh, okay.
I think also I felt like it was, we'll talk about it later, but I think it was made in such a way that it'll fit in a lot of theatres.
Yes.
As in, it would transfer quite easily to another theatre without much effort.
Yeah, you could actually see the blockwork in those kind of, in the actual
built.
stones, like, they just like glued together, I suppose, bolted together. What about like the trees and the fact that the background, it was a silhouette of trees that they parted for the scene changes, didn't they?
Yeah.
And did you think that was quite good?
I think it worked. I think it helped with the transitions rather than having a complete change. It was a good idea and it worked.
I agree, actually, because I think it hid that tree that if it's got nothing to do with this particular scene, then you don't see it. But then it allows you to sort of see those scenes,
it opened
one-off
the
scenes.
Yeah,
it changed it, but without it going anywhere else or something else off to the side of the stage or somewhere else. You know,
I feel like the exit.
focus.
I feel like the exits off the rock, as it were, felt like the cast were all walking off stage rather than walking off into another part of the island. That's how I felt. I felt like they were. It was very obvious that they were going off stage.
They were
rather
obvious
than
wings,
they were wings.
In a way. Yeah,
Nothing was hidden, as in they weren't going to another part of foliage through anything. It was just felt like they were walking off to move round to the other side to come on in a different place.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe we're being a bit too harsh, but I suppose when viewing it, I was thinking I could just imagine them just standing in the wings.
Yeah,
and I don't really want to be imagining them hanging about in the wings.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Now, how about the space that was used? You know, the scene changes.
I felt they were restricted. I felt like that didn't help. It sort of helps because of the performance, and you're meant to be trapped on an island. However, I think that the actual performance space was very narrow on the actual
I thought
set.
that because it just sort of just stopped in front of us. Although they could come out further,
Yeah,
just
they
to,
just didn't
to
wanna break
sit
the
out
wall.
a bit closer. But
Yeah.
it all sort of happened linearly.
Yeah.
Like every time they went further into this island, it always happened on one particular stage at the back.
It never really moved backwards and forwards much because they couldn't really spread out the same as certain other stages I've seen.
Yeah, but with these scene changes, basically what happened, the lights go down and then the actors on stage, they move about, take up the next positions. And I suppose we're all familiar with that kind of transition. But I suppose the one thing that it was good for was the obvious transition of going from, I think it was either scene 2 to scene 3, I think, where you go from the island to the bit deeper in where she's up the tree. And then, obviously, as we talked about, that wall. But it wasn't really a wall, it was like a wall of trees that sort of covered it. And that just obviously parted. So that transition...
It was the only real transition that happened, and you sort of...
Physical transition, other than the actors just moving bags about and sitting in different places.
I did like the cast making use of that, where they still carried on what was happening in the foreground, but we knew they weren't in the full shot. Sort of thing.
Because they didn't upstage at all. They
didn't encroach on the focus of the tree at the back. So it worked well in that way.
No, that's quite good. Now, with this being a reworking or an updated version, I suppose, of Neville's Island, did it work? Did the writing work? Because for me, I don't know if it worked for an all-female cast, and I love female casts in a lot of things. I love shows with females in or whatever. I kind of go for that kind of thing. But for this being like a female version of the males, I just think it just fell short.
I think I was a little confused myself because it was branded as a rewriting and a new comedy, when actually a lot of the plot, the actual writing and the actual play itself was very, very similar. All the comedic elements were not far from the original. I didn't feel like it had been rewritten completely. I felt like it was just updated in parts. There was some writing that I did question, where there was mentions of local places which almost made it feel like we were in a pantomime setting, which I don't like to use too lightly, but it didn't. There was mentions of Duffield when actually the whole play was set Chesterfield, Sheffield way, and Manchester was being mentioned, and I just felt like it was a little bit lost in the location, which made you struggle as an audience member.
Yeah. As for the tightness of it, because I know in the actual programme the writer has said, wasn't sure if it was going to work or not, because it was like somebody else's idea. Hey, why don't you write it as an all-female thing? And he went over it quite a lot. And he says he's tightened it up. Now, I can't remember... I mean, I've seen Neville's Island, but I've never analysed the script word for word, so I don't know what's been kept, what's been cut or anything. But I felt like it needed a little bit more tweaking, particularly in the first half... Well, first scene specifically. You know, get yourselves on the island, say why you're there, and then have this adventure, or get your cast of characters interacting. But it seemed to be a little bit drawn out.
Yeah, I just feel like it was the same sort of storyline almost for each of the characters, even though they were now female. And I felt like you sort of got a little lost in who they were and what they were there for. I just think there was moments with the writing where I think it was almost Neville's Island, because I've personally got experience of doing a few versions of Neville's Island with male casts. I've seen different versions. I've seen it done badly, I've seen it done well. So I know that it's a fine line between doing it right. I just felt like it could have been took further and it would have had more impact as a piece of writing.
Yeah, I think the performances of the cast, they fulfilled the roles of those characters, and we'll talk about the performances later. But in terms of how it was directed, what do you feel about that?
I feel that it was directed to perform to an audience rather than for people that were lost on an island.
I get that as well, because viewing it, I thought they're doing a lot of talking to the audience, but actually when you're in that situation, you act in that scene, so you ignore the fourth wall, you ignore the audience.
Don't break that wall.
And
Never break the wall.
It just seemed to be like there was a lot of, like, I don't necessarily want to say eye winking, but there was a little bit of that going on. Not all the way through.
It was just a strange... It felt a little awkward because you just felt like there was moments where the cast were lining up to deliver their lines to the audience rather than to each other. But then that could be because the set wasn't big enough. That shouldn't have been an issue because it should have been created so that they would have freedom and space to move about. But it just felt like everybody line up here and deliver these lines because then the audience can see it. And it just felt flat when it came to the direction.
I suppose with a limited space to move on the set. I can probably understand the difficulties there, but sometimes there was moments where Sheila, played by Judy Flynn, she could have delivered some of her lines sat down, but because the others were sat down as well, either going through the rucksacks or whatever, she stood up to say a particular line. Now, I forget what scene it was or what it was she delivered, but it just seemed a bit odd to stand up to deliver something where actually it would have worked if she was sat down, but the direction of it, I don't know. I don't think I've got anything positive to say. I don't think it was well directed.
I don't think it did justice to the writing, because we'll talk about performances later, but I think there was no work on comedic pauses. There was times when the cast carried on talking when the audience were actually applauding or laughing for the previous joke.
They didn't ride the laugh.
They threw away some of the lines, where they threw away some of the next level comedy moments where it would have made it even funnier if they'd have thrown those in a little bit later. And I did find that sometimes the volumes were lower, which didn't help then to land some of the lines that would make an audience laugh.
Which brings me to question, was that down to the actors, or was it lack of direction, or was it simply the fact that these actors, have they been working for the last 2 years? Because a lot of people, especially the actors, they've not done anything before. No. Well, of course they've done stuff before, but not for 2 years.
But, I mean,
is it that this was like a rushed production to get it on, really? Was it
complacent? Have they just sort of thought the lines will do the work for them? And that, in some ways, it shouldn't. No lines should do the work for you. You should do the work for the lines. Sometimes it's...
and is this the first job these actors have had for a while?
Yeah.
We don't know, but it just seemed a little bit overall empty in terms of the pacing and the directing.
The energy levels were low. I think that was the thing.
Apart from a couple.
We'll talk about the good bits, but I think overall you felt a little bit let down by the fact the cast could have increased their performances themselves to enhance. But then maybe that was direction as well. You don't know.
Now, moving on, do you know what we're here for? I think we're
here for the drama.
Now, what do you think about the performances? Because we can talk about this now, and we can talk about the cast, and if you thought anyone stood out, or was anybody chewing the scenery?
Well, personally, my biggest shout out is to Tracy Collier, who was the understudy. She understudied for Denise.
Yeah, Denise. Abigail Thor.
Yeah, for Abigail Thor. So,
and I didn't realise at the time that it was the understudy until the interval.
No.
And I actually looked at the programme.
For somebody that knows all 4 parts and has to stand in for all the cast, I found that she was well on top of her game and her energy levels.
She was phenomenal. I think she was actually first rate. And actually, there's only 2 actors in this, which is Judy Flynn and Sarah Crowe, which I know of their work, and that's what tempted me to come to see this play. But I was blown away by Tracy Collier's performance all the way through. Her energies were high, her spirit, her character. I knew exactly the kind of character she was.
She lived in that moment.
Yeah, that's not to in any way put the others down at all.
No,
at
not at all.
I think what benefited her performance, or highlighted her performance, or supported her performance, was the fact that she was the understudy, so she had more time to...
But she wasn't as well known. She's seen the others perform the production, and she's probably wanted to inject her energy into the production.
Well, she was basically understood the bench, aren't they?
Yeah,
do you know what
always.
I mean? They want to come on to the stage and they want to deliver the best they can. So she definitely shined. She was definitely in the limelight. And the other one was Rena. She was so down to earth and so relatable. You know those kind of people.
She definitely knew her character and who she was and what her aim was as a performer.
I thought as well with her delivery, it was a little dumbed down.
Yeah.
But she made the part her own in terms of she didn't just speak it as is. She absorbed the words and she lingered on words. But sometimes that particular character could be quite irritating.
Definitely. I think there was times as well where, as a whole, the cast just needed to watch their volume, because there was some times where their overall performance volume was lost on probably the 4th or 5th row of the audience. You know, there was times I was struggling to hear some of the words, and I think there was just no moments of throwing their voice at that point. It would have helped.
And I felt actually Judy Flynn, she worked well as Sheila, because if you know of her work, I mean, I've known her in like Dinner Ladies, where she played the secretary, Tune and Sweet Corn.
Yeah,
and then in British Empire, where she played Julie, which was another receptionist.
Yeah.
So for her being Sheila, being the sort of the lead,
forceful
exactly,
sort of person,
been management now, she did portray that really, really well. I suppose the only issue I had was at the very beginning, but I don't know if that's down to her portrayal or just the way it was, them all seeping in.
I know what you mean. I think it was the opening scene was probably the scene where you least believed that they'd been stranded on an island and wet and cold. It felt a little bit put on, where they didn't. It just felt like the entrance set you off on a low note rather than a high note, and I think that was the.
But was that down to the staging?
Yeah.
We don't know.
All the direction. We just I think it just felt a little flat, the entrance of all the cast in a way, because you sort of want to hit it hard with that entrance. It just felt a little bit low.
Now I want to talk about Sarah Crowe as well, because I've known her in she's been with Dan Bryson in the Philadelphia adverts, and from Sometime Never, which was like a really good sitcom. However, I'm sure she put on a voice to make and sometimes it was audible, a bit like how Rena was. Sometimes it got a little bit lost, but then she started singing, and she actually sounds like she got a really good singing voice.
Yeah,
but then there was a moment where everyone was laughing at her singing up a tree, and I wasn't quite sure if it was meant to be funny or people were laughing at her because it was silly.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore, if I'm thinking that, is there a disconnect with that particular character? But she looked the part as well as this kind of Christian.
Some of her line deliveries were brilliant in this comedic way, where she paused at the right point, she waited, and she delivered some of the lines that were probably the funniest in the production, because she just knew how to wait to get that punch.
Yeah.
And those lines that she delivered they just worked really well. She played that serious character.
And actually what that makes me think of is when they were stranded on the island and they were trying to light fire and stuff, there was a part where in the play you go through a journey of sort of losing your mind, which some of them did.
Yeah.
But there was that frustration and the anger and wanted to light this fire and I couldn't, and then all of a sudden Julia's got a stove in her backpack. And although it builds up for the comedy thing, I didn't see much frustration between some of them.
No, I think there was moments where Sarah sort of came into her own when she spoke about certain things where she already knew the answer to some things, but she'd let everybody else try and work it out, and she'd let everybody else try. There was moments where they were all trying to fix these problems and she'd already seen something, and her delivery of those moments, it was just funny, because
I think that's down to the character as well. It's like, I know the answer, but you've not asked me, so I'm not going to say it.
But I do find though that some of the cast reactions to that wasn't as big as it should have been, which would have made it funnier. It was like, it was always that I'm always Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, where you've got the answer, and when you deliver it, the reaction wasn't big enough. I mean, one of the other mentions, and I know it's probably going a little bit off piece, but when Julie, as in Rena, kept emptying her bag with different things, there was times the bag seemed a lot emptier than it was, and then all of a sudden there was more things that appeared.
Yeah, like in the second
act. And it's like they'd filled the bag again, because like they were all wearing helmets in the second half, and there was no sign of those helmets in that rucksack. It was pretty much empty in the first half, and yet she'd found these helmets in a rucksack, and there was just moments like that the continuity sort of was a little off on sort of moments like that.
I thought as a cast they worked really well together, actually. Do I think some of them were miscast? No, actually. I think, they were all quite believable, but I think for me, because it wasn't necessarily written for females, it just seemed a little bit odd.
Yeah.
I can't envisage Faye or female being that kind of a character bird watching.
Yeah, definitely. Because in essence, that's the same production as Neville's Island. It's the same ending. The bird is the same. The obsession with the bird in the for bird watching is the same. There's no spoilers, but if you've seen Neville's Island, it's the same ending of the production. So it felt that when I say that it had been written one way and it's gone another, that's why it felt a little bit lazy, maybe, just not to rewrite it.
I wanted
I was
to enjoy this. I wanted, I mean, it's a female version of it, so I wanted to like it more so.
Because even the poster image, it sort of leads you to believe that it's going to be a really good piece of theatre, and I think that's why I was a little disappointed that it didn't go there.
And also, credit to the girls. women, sorry, credit to them, they actually got changed on stage. You know,
Yeah,
towel wrapped
definitely.
around them.
Yeah.
One of them took the knickers off.
Yeah.
Whether it's the real knickers or not, I don't know.
But even so,
But they took the bras off and stuff. And
the
it's
way
like,
they did it made people react, and that's how it should have been. You know, and that's you know, it's been felt.
although
It does make me wonder though, if you had a flat stage, would the performances be better because they didn't have to navigate so much terrain in a way? It would have been nice to have maybe seen it with a bit more flat open stage.
But do you know what? I was even thinking, because they were all towelled up and they were undoing the bras and so on and so forth, I was thinking back to Tenko. And
yeah.
I'm going off on a tangent here. Now, they're all like in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and one of my favourite characters in that, Blanche by Louise Jameson, you know, they're all sort of like scared of being undressed in front of each other.
Yeah.
And she just like whips the top up, boobs are out. It's like, come on, we're all in this together, all girls together. And I thought, why didn't they do something like that? Not like I want to see a load of breasts, but why didn't one of them, with it being female, just be there saying, this is what I've got, you know.
Yeah.
You
but
know.
also, there was not really a reaction of one of them not wanting to do that and having the levels. It was like they've
They all
never done this together before.
Yeah.
They've all been put together to do this. It's not like they've done this team building exercise before.
Yeah.
And it felt a little bit like you've lost a moment where there's levels to every character. People might be not as confident with each other and want to shy away from getting changed. And yes, somebody's going to be overconfident, but there's somebody going to be underconfident.
Exactly. You could play on that because for men, I think it's just different, isn't it? You can take your top off, and you're not particularly bothered at all. No. You know, I dare say some can even take the lower trousers off and whatever, and just not be bothered either. But for the women, I thought you could have actually rewritten or just added a little bit of awkwardness, or
just to make it funnier and almost you know, somebody who's free against somebody that's not very sort of closed and guarded.
Yes,
because that would have helped the characterizations a little bit more as well.
Yes. Now we've talked about the set, which was designed by Liz Cook, but also the costumes were as well. Now, what did you think of the costumes?
I mean, it's one of those things where this production, costume-wise, you can't really go very far, apart from it's outdoor wear. And I did like the moments where Julie's character, Rena, had a lot of the costumes pre-wrapped in a lot of plastic to stop them getting wet and things that. And there was a little moment of fun where a whole sort of evening gown came out of the rucksack, which had a good impact.
See, the props were good.
The props were good, yeah.
Yes.
They were good. And I think they did enough of a blend of different colours on stage. And
well, they had literally the whole kitchen sink in that rucksack, which was funny. Now, whether that was in Neville's Island, I'm not quite sure.
It was. Yeah,
was it?
Yeah, the one that got lost did get lost, and it's the same principle. I did feel, though, that the other two rucksacks never got opened, really, and there was not a lot coming out of them.
No.
And it did feel a little bit like they'd been thrown away, and they are props, and they should be used. So maybe they could have found some more items in that one as well, even if they were wet or they'd been drained.
But also,
handy.
Now, whenever my mum goes out anywhere, she's always got a handbag.
Yeah.
None of them have handbags or anything like that. Right, fine, okay, if they're not going to take anything like that, but she'd have pockets of boiled sweets.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Polo mints.
Yeah.
This is all the women I know kind of
gone
have
to the level
them
of
kind
having
of things.
bags full of
Even
outdoor stuff.
Small
there'd be other
pockets
things
full
in
of boiled
there.
sweets.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when Julie was taking the sausage out, I was expecting for her to like take something out that she could probably sneakily eat before handing over the sausage. But then again, that's down to the actual play. But I think if you understand women, you could write it and adapt it a little bit more and add these little quirky bits, so it's a completely different play in its entirety, but it suits the characters.
Yeah, and it still has the same link to Neville's Island. I think that's why we're talking about it in such a way.
But I suppose they did, I think, talk about hockey.
Yeah.
Which was different to the football.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Which
it was, but
now that worked.
Yeah, that worked, and they,
because they were talking about the navy pants.
Definitely, yeah, that worked.
Well, moving on to our next segment.
What the tech is this?
Now, you're a technical person, Richard. What did you think about, the use of sound, lighting, the special effects? Because they did use them.
Yeah, they did.
I witnessed them.
I think I'd start with sound. I think there was a lot of moments where they just needed to up the volume on the sound effects themselves. They just felt thrown away. I think there was times where the initial entrance was a splash that was delayed and not loud enough. So when the first entrance came in that had that impact, it sort of felt flat just because the sound effect, you didn't know what Sheila's character had just come from, because the splash just wasn't there. I heard it, but then a lot of people wouldn't.
It was like a 5-second delay, and
Yeah.
it kind of lent itself to like being a bit of a pantomime
Yeah.
drop, where you drop
Yeah.
it and then you hear something a bit different, or
Definitely.
a bit of a delayed thing.
I think there was also moments where, for example, the fireworks in the second act, they just felt a little thrown away. There was no bass to the firework bang that made it feel bigger. It felt like it was that far in the distance, which I understand that they wanted it to be in the distance, but you couldn't hear it as part of the sort of ambience of being at a firework display.
Yeah.
Because the sound does travel quite a distance for a firework
does.
when it explodes.
Yeah.
Also,
you ask anybody with a dog.
Yeah, exactly. They'll all tell you that. And also there was the recordings of the boat going by. They were good, but I do think there was a little bit of that lost as well.
And
So,
also
yeah.
the plane up
plane,
above.
yeah.
That was a bit too distant.
Yeah, it just-
Because bless her, Judith, she was on stage. Oh, can you hear it? Shush, shush. Well, no, you
No,
couldn't hear anything.
and then there was another delay before we heard it, and it was like,
Yeah.
and it felt like just timings were a little bit off as well, which for that, sound is another person on stage. It isn't
is.
a throwaway piece of work. Sound and lighting are always another person on stage, so it's just as important as the cast members, and that's why I think it could have been worked on a little bit better.
I felt the lighting, the backdrop lighting, that was good for the atmosphere,
Yeah,
for the
it worked.
changing
Yeah.
of going from night,
Yeah.
afternoon, and day,
Yeah, they
and
did
so on
a
and
lot
so
of
forth.
that.
But when they had the helicopter searchlights,
Yeah.
it just seemed to be a bit too much.
Yeah.
Like on the audience before anything was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it
It
would have been done
felt
by
a
a
little
follow
bit-
spot,
yeah.
I suppose, but
Yeah.
it could have been like one of them search
Yeah,
things.
definitely. It felt more like a headlight rather than a helicopter or whatever. And I think there was times where the fireworks, you're better off having coloured flashes on faces than
Yeah.
sort of trying to recreate a firework, because you can't do that in the same way. You're better off just having the effect of the sound effects with flash of colour is enough to create that
But also
feeling.
with fireworks, you get different types as
Yeah.
well. And there was none of them, which I always hear is like a great big boom and then like a fizzle out.
Yeah, and the lights
None of them.
felt like they came from the same location rather than from different places, and firework lights aren't always from one point. And I know it's difficult because they've got lighting rigs and stuff, but yeah, there are ways to do it.
Now, the special effects, when they're trying to light the
Yeah.
fire, and all we had was a little bit of a...
Tiny little bit of smoke that wasn't on cue. It came a bit later than they've actually started.
And it was
They
on
were
and off.
talking about setting the fire out and setting the fire, and it was a good delay before that smoke started to appear.
Would you have preferred them to have had a fake fire?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because you
Because-
can't have even though they had their
Yeah.
sparklers on
Yeah.
and the gas stove, they can't have a real fire
No,
there.
I think the smoke was a good idea. I think it was just timing. And I think if Sheila, while she was lighting the fire, would have stayed trying to light the fire until the smoke had appeared,
And you blow
then
on it as well,
then
don't
it would
you,
have
to-
been more
yeah.
effective. But she started the fire and walked away, which
And then it
threw away
stopped,
the effect.
yes.
And it was like, but you've got to almost show that you know how a fire's lit in that way to make it look real.
Yes,
you know?
because that was like another technical thing, which was like a technical delay.
Yeah.
Judy, bless her, she rubbed her hands together with the stick. She said, "Oh, we've got a fire." I didn't expect anything. I thought,
No.
okay, we're imagining this
Yeah,
fire.
yeah, yeah,
then
exactly.
she walked away. Then all of a sudden, it's like
There's
a little bit
yeah,
of smoke. I would have preferred if you can't have a proper fire, or if you're not going to go down the route of having like a fake fire with
Yeah, yeah,
like
of course.
lights and flapping
Yeah, yeah.
fabric or whatever. Do that kind of rubbing together with the sticks, maybe behind the boulder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then all
Something.
you see is great
The
big
action.
oodles
Yeah.
of smoke.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can then think there's a fire behind that
Yeah,
boulder
yeah,
that
yeah,
I can't see,
Yeah.
but I know it's going to
But
be
I know
there.
what they're doing
I don't
through
have
the
to
action.
see it.
Yeah.
What about the pizza? Was that a real pizza, do you think?
It was a real piece of pizza.
Why didn't they soak it in water?
They didn't soak it in enough water. I think it was soaked, but it just wasn't in enough.
I never saw any dripping.
And
but
there was
yeah.
not enough dripping coming from that pizza when they tried to squash the water out of it. And I think they tried it, but it just didn't get enough out of it. They could have had a thin piece of sponge in there with some water hidden in the pizza that could have created more water, but I think it was a misstep, really, because it was a wasted.
It was a waste of a
moment.
pizza, and also I think they got the wrong pizza. If they'd had like a deep cut,
Yeah,
a thick
deep
cut,
pan, it
deep
would've-
pan,
yeah, it
that would have
was-
soaked up an awful lot of water.
Yeah, and it
they
would've-
clearly had a thin crust one there
Yeah, it
because
was a
it's
thing.
floppy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's always deep pan all
See,
the way.
they need to be pizza lovers.
Yeah,
they
always.
really do. And any other kind of backstage technical issues?
Yeah,
do you
I think
happened on the night?
there's a few I noticed where one of the stagehands came on to get set during the brownout, not the blackout. So it went to brownout. You could clearly see somebody walk on with a headset on to get some pieces of scenery to move to the other side of the stage while that was on. Then it went to blackout, which is why I didn't understand why they came on at that point rather than waiting for the moment where they wouldn't be seen. It was a little distraction that could have been done differently and would have not detracted from the fact that they're on an island and there's also somebody else on the island. It's a distraction that you don't need.
Now, to wrap this up, now for our ratings, as we say. Call this a show. Right, so Richard, what was your final thoughts to sum up for us?
My personal view is it could be on its way to become something really good. I think that the more performances they do, they may iron out some of these issues, but I think they do need to reflect on some things that may work and may not have worked. It may have thrown them because they got an understudy. However, with a performance like this, and understudies being the backbone of any performance, as we've found out during the pandemic and onwards, understudies have never before been needed as much as they have now. So you've got to get used to that. And overall, it was a good performance. I wouldn't say it was a great performance. So, yeah, I don't know about you, Stephen.
Well, yeah, I wanted to enjoy this a lot more than I actually did. Do I place the blame with the actors? No, because I think they did give a good performance.
Exactly.
I don't know. When you're paying for going to see like a professional show, you do expect, I mean, we did get professionalism, don't get me wrong, but I expected a little bit more where this felt like people I'd known on TV just being in a local Amdram. And that's not really what I expect. But was that the directing? Was it the set? Was it the
writing?
Yeah, exactly. Was it going from a male perspective to a female one? It didn't work for me. But I did enjoy Tracy, Sarah, Rena and Judy. I thought they were great. It's a shame we never got to see Abigail's version of Denise, but we saw Tracy and I thought she was bloody brilliant.
I think she did. I think she did a really, really good job. Yeah.
Yeah. So, scores on the doors. What are we going to give this one out of 10 for Sheila's Island? Richard?
Well, personally, I think I can't give any more than a 4. And I know that sounds harsh.
It was very lacklustre. I want to give the actors a 5. However, the production of it just left me cold, so no more than a 5. So what sound effects are you going to give this particular production? Are you going to give it a train wreck, which I think you're probably heading towards? Is it tumbleweed? Is it a pleasant applause? Or is it a standing ovation?
You see, I'm thinking tumbleweed.
Oh, do you know what?
The effort they went into, they tried their hardest. However, I do feel that the writing let it down and it felt very pedestrian.
Well, I want to join you with a tumbleweed, but I think a very, very
light applause.
Slow clap from me. So I brought my own sound effects for that one.
Okay. So, there we are. That's our discussion of Sheila's Island. We hope you found it insightful,
if not entertaining.
Coming up over the next few episodes, we'll be discussing Barry Humphries, the man behind the mask,
Animal Farm,
and the new production of Cluedo.
That's it for this week, folks.
If you'd like to drop us a message, please email us at upstagedowstagepod@gmail.com. Remember, you can always join in the chat to share with us your views on a production.
Also, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you get every episode the second it's released. And we hope you join us again for another instalment of Upstage Downstage.